Okay, well, we're going to get started. Welcome to Alpine Learning Group's Innovations in Autism series. This webinar, Setting the Groundwork for Friendships, is one in a series of free webinars presented throughout the month of April. At the close of this presentation, we will share a QR code to learn about our other presentations in this series. I'm Dr. Jamie DeQuinzio, Behavior Analyst and Consultant at Alpine Learning Group. For the last 12 years, I've had the pleasure of working alongside a group of innovative and compassionate leaders in the field of autism here at Alpine. I'm happy we're able to share their expertise with you here today. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. This presentation is being recorded and will be made available on our website in the coming days. We'll also send an email to all registered participants to let you know once the recording is available. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen or in the chat area. We will have a few minutes at the end before we close to answer those questions. And now I'm very excited to introduce Brielle Spangenberg and Erica Emery, who will share information on promoting social learning opportunities for children with autism.
Just as Jamie said, in this presentation, we are going to look at some key items for when we're addressing social play, setting that groundwork. So by the time we have concluded, you'll be able to identify prerequisite skills necessary for participating in social focused instruction. You will have learned how to promote engagement and how to provide support through those planned activities. And you will have also learned planning strategies and tips for setting up playdates and sibling play.
Thank you, Erica, for setting us up with those objectives. So we're going to dive a little bit right in about why are playdates important? And we will talk a little bit about studies showing that typically developing children that have more opportunities to practice and participate in playdates actually results in speeding up and promoting the development of prosocial behaviors. It's also been noted that children who invite others more frequently to play with them actually get invited more frequently to go play at their house as well. They have more overall opportunities to play and with a larger range of peers. This is super important for establishing friendships and building relationships through that repeated contacts. Playdates provide opportunities to practice those emerging skills. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or otherwise known as the DSM-5 here, specifies criteria in order to diagnose a person on the spectrum. You'll see some of these categories here can make up a wide range of skills and can vary quite a bit given the spectrum. And we'll talk a little bit briefly about a few examples that pertain to building friendships here. The first category is social emotional reciprocity. So this could be anything from answering when somebody makes a comment towards us or keeping conversations fluid and that general back and forth nature of an interaction. Nonverbal communication, that might have to do with some body positioning, possibly orienting towards those who are speaking to us or while we're listening, using non-vocal communication like gestures, like nodding your head when you're listening or attentive or agreeing with something that somebody says. And we know that there's tons of rules that change based on different scenarios. This involves a lot of perspective taking, which is involved in developing and maintaining and understanding relationships. The last category here is restrictive and repetitive behaviors, interests, or activities. This can be anything from motor stereotypy to a favorite script being vocalized very frequently in the middle of conversations, or often wanting to talk about a specific topic. It's evident that some of these core areas here do impact relationship building. To tie it together, there's also been studies to show that children with autism who also play more frequently, have those play dates, similar to the typically developing children studies. Those children that play more frequently in their home with their peers were shown to have greater amounts of time spent engaging in those pro-social skills. And they took a look at where they were at the school setting, a novel setting on the recess playground, and they were able to see that there was increases in important skills like conversation, taking turns, sharing. And a very important piece too is that there was an overall positive response and affect from their peers. When it comes down to it, there's a lot of social rules that vary from one situation to the next. What I do with my best friend is not going to be the same things that I do towards a stranger. And understanding those different types of relationships, what's appropriate in this setting versus another setting versus with a different type of relationship category, this can make navigating the social world really challenging. However, we have a technology that can be applied to help shape some of these important friendship skills. Direct systematic instruction is often necessary to teach children these pro-social skills. A wide range of skills have been taught using ABA strategies across the ages, whether it's children, adolescents, or young adults. There's been skills that have been successfully taught, including things like asking questions, refraining from interrupting, maintaining that back and forth reciprocal nature of a conversation, adjusting, talking about topics when they see somebody not interested in the topic that they're talking about, and a variety of other important skills. When we talk about promoting opportunities for engagement, a lot of questions come to mind. Are there necessary skills that they need to have first? What are those? Which activities are best? Is there a specific type of play or interaction that you should be trying to achieve? How do you set up those opportunities? And what do you do if it's not going according to plan? You might need to provide some additional supports. Having certain prerequisite skills will help increase the chances of learning those more complex skills faster and more fluently. These are going to be skills that are important to learn before and that are part of the makeup of a larger skill that has many components. So we want to think about the big picture. This is setting that groundwork, building that foundation to get to those skills that have multiple steps and that involve a lot of different skills in one. Think about it like this. If I don't recognize my numbers, I won't be able to do addition. Similarly, if I am speaking at a volume that is very low, it's going to be challenging for others to understand what I'm saying and to be able to have that back and forth flow of a conversation skill. Some of these skills here are, this is certainly not an exhaustive list. This is some of the examples that Erica and I have found that as practitioners have found it to be helpful in predicting if a child is ready for those environments socially that are requiring a little bit less support. So let's just go through the list a little bit here. Being able to accept prompting, feedback, and assistance, learning new skills, guidance from others, being able to adapt in the moment. This is going to help with learning those emerging skills. Can they accept when someone says, oh, let's try it this way? And that's going to be helpful, as I mentioned, for emerging skills, for guidance in the moment, for coaching through situations that arise, as these are typically going to involve some kind of coaching. Motivation. The potential for social interaction in itself to be something that is preferred, neutral, potentially aversive. There are assessments that can evaluate if a child responds to social interaction in those types of manners. And this could be a starting point, right? If we know that the child tends to, let's say, walk across the room when someone approaches them, then this might be an area that we need to address first. Just remaining in nearby proximity to others. Those kind of go hand in hand, right? How long are they in that area? Do they approach? Do they actively move away? Those are the kinds of prerequisite skills related to just being around others and overall motivation. Often with an inability to communicate basic wants and needs comes the potential for challenging behavior. As we know, in these social environments, there's a lot of things going on. So being able to communicate, I need this, I need to use the bathroom, or I really want to play with that toy, is super helpful in the moment. When someone is really fluent, it also takes that potential for challenging behavior, which can result in more negative interactions with peers. And overall behavioral flexibility. So this can be applied across a variety of different areas, as far as somebody is playing with something that's not available for them. Maybe something isn't available at all. Shifting gears, moving to different activities, transitioning from something that's highly preferred to more neutral. These are common situations that happen in these settings and that are likely to happen in a play date or in a group environment where peers are present. Continuing on, here are a few additional prerequisite skills that will help build the foundation. These first two are really about learning. This will help learning those new skills easier, right? Are they able to follow simple instructions? Can they learn from imitation, modeling? This will make it easier than needing to use more restrictive prompting strategies like physical assistance. And this will be ideal because, in addition, imitation can be used by observing their peer. This opens up the options for learning a little bit faster in those environments and requiring less support overall. Having a few different play activities that they're interested in or engage in independently or somewhat independently helps open the door for more opportunities to join them and build on those skills. And lastly, voice volume, something I had mentioned on the previous slide. This will result in lost social opportunities if somebody can't understand what they're saying. It also might result in the peer getting frustrated, having to repeat themselves, and potentially moving away from the interaction, ending the interaction abruptly. Voice volume is an important prerequisite to maintaining conversation, responding to peers in general, and being in those social environments.
The truth of the matter is, when it comes to increasing social and play behavior, there's no activity that is innately better than another. First, look at what are they motivated by? Do they love playing Fortnite? Do they keep asking you to play the songs from Encanto on repeat? When you're working on these foundational skills, step into their world. It's probably going to look different, and it's really going to feel silly the first couple of times. But if it grabs their attention, then you've done it. It may look like structured play, something that has a concrete start and end like a board game, or it might be unstructured, something that is open-ended, like drawing together, building different items or structures with a set of blocks. And maybe there is a specific toy or game that they're struggling with, or they come home and tell you they really want to be friends with someone from school, but they don't know how. In these instances, you are still going to follow their motivation, but you're guiding them by providing choices every step of the way. You might say, do you think your friend likes building with Legos, or do they like drawing and coloring? What should we play after dinner? Should we play Mario Kart or Candyland? When they're able to decide from a choice of selections, you're confirming they are motivated in that activity before you move on from there. And once you begin creating these pockets of opportunities, you're going to start to notice them everywhere. We're surrounded by opportunities to engage in conversation or play with the people around us. But what if they don't initiate on their own? Even if your child loves Paw Patrol, that doesn't mean they're going to come up to you and ask if you'll pretend to be chased with them. Sometimes you have to facilitate and lead them to these opportunities so that way they learn they're available. That may mean carving out 10 minutes for facilitated play after dinner, or you might spontaneously grab their attention when you see them playing alone and you join them to scaffold it into a joint activity. When you create these opportunities, you're providing more ways to practice things like sharing and turn taking across virtually any activity, whether it's with you, their siblings, a family friend. We know that learning a new skill will require repetition for it to strengthen and grow. So finding those pockets, practicing with all these different types of people, it's going to continue to build that foundation. You may think you have to pull out a board game to practice turn taking, but it doesn't always have to be that way. Maybe you're picking out what movie to watch or who gets to pick the story at bedtime. Embedding this language throughout daily activities will provide ways to practice and build tolerance for when it's their turn and when it's not. Now, building social and play skills takes time and practice, and your approach will change over time. There are different types of supports that you might find necessary to use. There are two types of supports you may look to use, right? Materials you add to the game or using items that are embedded in the activity. The type of support you use will also vary based on what your child is doing. Supports that are added are anything you provide in addition to the materials needed for that activity. If your child's energetic and spirited, having a timer they can see and scheduled movement breaks is a support you might add to the game. Maybe you write a simplified version of the directions on an index card so you can gesture to them instead of repeating them every round verbally. Or it could be having a visual schedule so everyone knows when is this activity ending, what's coming next. For instance, the schedule that you see here on the slide, it's a simple 5-step visual guide showing exactly which types of activities are happening, when they are starting, and which ones are coming next. Oftentimes, we might look to review this before the start of a play date and then throughout every transition, just to have that reminder of how close are we to going home, what's coming next, and being able to prepare. Then if we look at supports that are embedded, that may include anything that can be manipulated or adjusted within the context of the game itself. If your child has trouble scanning and seeing a large picture, or it takes them longer to focus when they're given a lot of options, manipulate those activity materials so that the pieces they need are closer and the ones they don't are farther away. You may cover up half of the board game so they're not getting distracted by what's coming later. You might also remove excess materials so only the tools that they need are out. Now, some kiddos will be able to build social and play skills from modeling and shaping from you and others. Others, or other types of social activities, require more structured teaching. One of the ways we do this is through behavioral skills training. All of that is to say, we use role play to practice and rehearse skills, which require multiple steps. When skills require those multiple steps to complete, using role play increases the opportunity for practice and allows you to provide immediate support. First, we verbally describe the skill and why we're doing it. You might say, when you see someone playing with the toys you like, go up to them, ask to join them. Or if you have a game that needs 2 people, go up to them, ask them to join you. Take the skill inviting others to play an activity, right? On the slide, we have those concrete steps broken down, and there are multiple steps needed to do this one social interaction. First, you have to approach a peer, make sure they're not standing too close before inviting them to join you. Then you need to wait for a response or gain their attention and try again until they respond. You have to persist in gaining that response. What sets behavioral skills training apart is that it involves immediate feedback and rehearsal until an error is corrected. Say your child asks the other child to join them, but that other child is focused on building and doesn't acknowledge them, and your child doesn't persist. At that point, you step in, you provide immediate feedback. Maybe you say, I love how you went up to your friend and got their attention. That was awesome inviting them to play with you. But wait, they didn't answer. Let's try this again. But this time, repeat your question and say their name to get their attention if they don't answer you. You rehearse it again, providing the behavior-specific feedback afterwards. Eventually, you would expect for that social player activity to be rewarding on its own, But when you are building these skills up, providing that additional praise and feedback is integral to building the skill further. Now that we've discussed setting the groundwork, we're going to start to address how do you structure these play dates and sibling play opportunities. First, you're going to need to plan and prepare before it's time to play. We also need to be aware of what do we need to do and what do we need to know during the activities. And just as important, how are you going to follow through after that play date is over?
So here we'll talk a little bit about some helpful hints for planning to structure that playdate and how to be ready for that playdate when it happens. Often time gets a hold of us. Things pop up really quickly. We might jump on them. We're excited. We really want to have this playdate that was offered to us. But we want to make sure that we are planning in advance so that way that we're considering all these really important variables. I would like you to take a moment to think to yourself, how often does it work if your child is not carefully prepared? Now, everyone's different, right? They might be able to, they might not be able to. So thinking about strengths and challenges, which is why I emphasize you to ponder, because you are your child's best expert. You know them best and what has worked in the past and what hasn't worked. Remember that we ourselves, we often use a lot of things to prepare ourselves for our day-to-day things. We use things like agendas for meetings. We check off lists when we're going to the grocery store. These are all things that we use to prepare ourselves in our day-to-day activities. Planning in advance for our kids can help make this process much smoother and more successful. The considerations that I pose here are going to be specific to the learner, and there is not a one-size-fits-all answer. However, these are a lot of different variables that you can consider when thinking about setting up that play date and structuring how it's going to go. The first is who is going to be a good candidate to play. Generally, we want to see that there is a good model, right? Maybe that peer has really strong social skills. They're responsive, motivated to participate, although we can also help with facilitating that in the process. Behavioral flexibility, again, this time on the peer's behalf. This is important as it might arise that there are potential challenges. Are they going to be able to ask that child again a few times in case they didn't answer the first time? And it's also important to remember that if it's someone that they see regularly, then that's probably a good idea as well, as they're going to have those increased opportunities to see them in the natural environment and on the weekend, during holidays. So thinking about family, friends, and people that they see usually. Where is that hangout going to take place? Is it best to be in your own home? Will it be at the peer's house? Is it okay if it is going to be at the peer's house? Is it okay with you being present that whole time? Is the parent aware? Are they both potentially ready to be in a group environment or in a community activity? These are some of the questions that you want to think about when you're planning where it's going to take place. If you think that structure is really important and familiarity is very important, then it's probably best to start with in your own home. One of the most common questions I hear is, how long should that play date be? Is 2 hours too long for the first time? Generally, I'm going to say yes. We want to always think about our baseline, right? Generally, we want to look for these kinds of activities to start at shorter lengths of times and gradually increase that time as the child becomes more ready, more independent, more comfortable. We know that repeated exposure and practice helps people become more comfortable and learn new skills. It's better to have 10 minutes of a really positive interaction that's fun, engaging, both children leave with a smile, than an hour-long playdate that ends up resulting in potential challenging behavior, tantrums, and leaving on a negative note. Think about the overall goal here, right? We want them to have fun together. Being available. So just being mindful that you may be needed. You may be needed to help support, to help coach through. So that means being available means to be able to provide that assistance when necessary, right? Not planning a phone call when it's taking place or a meeting or other activities, just being able to jump in and help support your child. And thinking about which activities, what are you going to do there? Which activities are successful? Which are more challenging? It's recommended to start with activities that the child's more familiar with, as then they will require less support in those kinds of environments. Motivation matters, as Erica touched on a little bit. We know that motivation impacts learning. Kogel and colleagues in 2005, they did a study and found that it was more successful when the activities chosen were both reinforcing for those children. So both those children liked that activity. That helped the motivation to participate and the engagement overall. If you know that both children love, let's say, Don't Break the Ice or Trouble, that's going to be an activity that you potentially will plan for using, right? They're going to be more likely to want to participate from the start if those activities are something that they love. Next, plan for using additional supports if the child benefits from things like visuals and schedules, and that requires some planning in advance. It's recommended to use supports that they're familiar with. Again, these are going to be things that you don't want to teach in the moment necessarily. You can, but it will make it easier as far as the flow and the amount of support that they need if they're being taught that or carrying it over from another setting. Another helpful strategy to do before is something we call priming, or another name for that is pre-teaching. This is a proactive strategy. It's all about preparing the child before with what they can expect to do. This might be involving, you're standing at the front door, you're ringing the doorbell and you say, hey, don't forget to say hi and have a smile when they open the door. Just a simple rule reminder. This can also be about setting up the expectations. So it can look like something like, we're going to have to take turns. Remember, if you want to take a turn, you can just say, can I have a turn? And make sure you keep your hands down, right? We're not going to grab. Let's practice. You can practice before, setting up opportunities to give them feedback prior to that play date happening. Prioritize skills that are very important for them to remember and that they're maybe not so independent with from the start. We always want to think about the potential of challenging behaviors arising. What are you going to do to be proactive? What will you do to get through it? Proactive strategies might involve intervening when you see that the child is showing precursor behaviors. These are typically happening prior to more escalation. If you know that your child engages in throwing objects, but before that, they typically complain and maybe make a negative facial affect, we're going to intervene when we see that negative facial affect happen. Thinking about what happens first if there is a sequence prior to that more escalated behavior. This is a time for you to set up an opportunity for a break, switching up an activity, an opportunity for communication about what their wants or needs are in that moment. Again, a prerequisite skill, right? We need to know if that child can communicate those wants and needs. This is why it's super important. In the moment, if they can't communicate those wants and needs, it's going to be a little bit of a guessing game and trying to kind of put out the fire in the moment. If challenging behavior is a concern, it's recommended to consult with your provider so that way you're planning in advance with proactive strategies, the best strategies to use that work for your child, and also in this novel type of setting. I also suggest something that I like to do during parent support sessions is practicing through role playing, just parent and provider, right? What are we going to do in this situation? What if this happens? Well, what if this happens? There's so many things that can happen and pop up. So it's great to practice through role playing, and it might feel a little uncomfortable at first, but I promise it will only benefit everybody involved. And this can help you feel more comfortable and build your fluency with supporting in the moment and remaining calm. And remember that remaining calm is so important. You're modeling self-regulation to your child when you are frustrated. Lastly, I would like to briefly touch on reinforcement. We can certainly talk about reinforcement for several hours. It's beyond the scope of this presentation. And just briefly, when we talk about reinforcement, we're talking about applying some consequence that results in an increase in that skill or behavior. We want to plan for when reinforcement is necessary in these environments. What kind of items function as reinforcers? So if something's preferred, does it increase that behavior though, right? That is going to be the key difference. How much effort is involved in accessing that reinforcer? How discreet can you be, right? We're in a social environment. We don't want to make a huge deal where we're separating them necessarily unless necessary. To have some, possible like break time to play with a preferred activity alone. But if it's possible to be more discreet and get away with some social reinforcement, if those things function as a reinforcer, this is ideal. This is a great long-term goal, right? We're reducing that. We're reducing that time that takes away from the play date. And if social consequences function as a reinforcer, we should be using them as they are occurring naturally in interactions. Thumbs up, right? Big smiles, whisper in the ear, I'm so proud of you. That doesn't even really need to be a whisper, right? We can say that totally out loud, and the peer might even pick up on it and say, oh, wow, I should do that too. So thinking about those natural contingencies as well, which we'll touch a little bit on a little bit later. Additionally, this discussion is primarily for individuals with autism, but the child participating as the peer also benefits from this practice. So it would be a good idea to discuss with the peer's caregiver in advance about delivering positive reinforcement, what type of things they're comfortable with, for which skills. It's really important to pick those skills carefully and in a manner that's going to facilitate furthering those interactions, right? When I want to think about peer reinforcement, I want to think about them persevering, right? They asked that child a question, and even though they didn't answer the first time, they asked them again, and they got that answer. That's great. That really helps. And now the child is responding, right? And so it shows them, oh, I just have to ask them again, right? They didn't hear me necessarily. Instead of just moving on and ending that abrupt interaction ending. Other skills might include teaching a new friend how to talk or answer a question, communicating, explaining to the child, sharing. These are all great skills to reinforce on the peer's behalf. Typically, developing children also often require this kind of coaching to learn how to further these interactions, how to maintain positive relationships, and generally about the diagnosis. Why do these behaviors happen? What can I do to help? And seeing that shift in real time helps. Increased acceptance among neurotypical populations is crucial. These kinds of conversations and opportunities to coach and practice in these environments will help build that acceptance and growth. Now, what are we going to do during that play date? Here are some helpful suggestions and tips to facilitate that play date from start to finish. So once again, we'll touch on that we are going to use those visual supports. These help us feel better prepared, and they can help guide and structure the play date, not only for the child, but for the other peer and for you. Schedules can be set up a variety of ways. There's picture schedules, there's written textual schedules, a combination of both. They even have a lot of different apps these days that have a lot of choices to select from or to create your own pictures. I find that those are usually a hit these days, as they're something you can easily carry with you and bring to different settings. Setting up the schedule together is a good way to collaboratively work together and promotes more opportunities for those social interaction skills. Things like conversation, negotiating, potentially compromising, problem solving. You can consider that, Each child maybe picks a game or activity each. Just make sure that you plan in advance, right? Which activities are you going to have as options to begin with? This might look like pre-planning 5 activities with the hopes of picking 3, but having those extra choices and also being flexible, right? If the children want to swap something out, that's okay. You can structure it verbally by making it clear. You might say something like, we're going to make a schedule. What are we going to do today? Show them some pictures or have those materials potentially out already. And verbalizing, you know, we have 5 choices, but we only need 3. I'm going to pick one. Johnny can pick one, and then Mike can pick the next one. That way, everybody gets one choice. It's important to remember that it's okay to veer away from the schedule. Respond to needs, respond to boredom, disengagement. Again, this whole purpose is to have fun and build friendships. We don't want that plate to get stale. If they need a break or lose interest, it's okay to move on, pick a different activity to swap in, be proactive and have realistic expectations about how long each activity should go. This process should really be flexible, not rigid. It's okay to adapt in the moment. Scripts can help cue what to say during play activities, conversation, and overall communication. I have a little visual here. This is just a very simple WH starter question text prompt, let's say snack conversation, where it's just an opportunity for open-ended conversation, and this helps facilitate coming up with more things to ask or say. These material supports require being available. What does it mean to be available, though? Remember to be available, present, and flexible. Here we have several strategies to help guide and facilitate that play date. Using language that communicates clear expectations helps set up the child's expectations clearly. Less is more often. Make your words really valuable, right? I often see situations where there's a lot of verbiage happening and it might become background noise at that point, right? We want to make our words really valuable so what we're saying is important and they're attending to what we're saying. Pointing out social cues that are not easily identified. Sometimes this is a challenge that many children, adolescents, adults on the spectrum have, right? So pointing that out instead of just kind of moving on is a good idea for them to learn in that social environment. In fact, social cues involve others, and you need to be paying attention to somebody else's body language and facial affect to be able to pick up on these kinds of things. This might be as simple as the peer is maybe has a shift in their affect, and you're like, oh no, it looks like they have a sad face. Right? And then modeling some problems they're solving. Well, why are they sad? Why could they be sad? It looks like, oh, wait, maybe pointing to something that happened in the environment that they can pick up on. Oh, his toy broke. Modeling how to problem solve together as well. He's sad he can't find his orange Lego piece. What should we do? See if they can come up with an answer together. However, be able to provide that support and scaffolding to get those responses more fluently. Modeling solutions with them together, coming up with ideas, right? There's so many different ways that we can solve one problem. We can build using different Legos. We can move on, right? We can pick something else if we don't want to do this anymore. It's ideal to redirect communication from the children about each other to the adults to each other, right? I often see in social environments where the child has a long history of being with adults. So often we see this where they're one-to-one with an adult for so long that, they're like, why is Johnny doing that? Or what is he like? Just redirecting that communication. I don't know, why, you ask him. So kind of just facilitating and giving just, a quick prompt to like, let's ask him, let's find out. And you can make it engaging and enticing like that too. Like, I want to find out too, right? Additionally, with communication, we want to always think about facilitating replacement language, as situations arise very frequently in social environments, like we touched a little bit on before, like something happens where maybe the peer took their toy away really abruptly, and the first thing that they do is scream, let's say, right? In that moment, we're gonna provide that assistance, say, you just have to tell him, like, I was playing with that, right? Or, another example might be, they need help with something, but they said it in a maybe really demanding way. So providing those additional communication opportunities with different language to use, and not only different language, but modeling that tone of voice, right? Say it like me, or in that conversational volume. So that way it doesn't end up resulting in a negative interaction with the peer. Observing and responding to indices of boredom or not being engaged or just uninterested. And this just ties back into what I was mentioning a little bit earlier about being flexible and adapting in the moment, responding to precursors and changing things up, right? We want this to be fun. We don't want it to become something that's like, it's like a chore. And lastly, as the child is becoming more successful with certain activities and certain skills, this is an opportunity for you to fade your distance away, right? Standing 5 feet away or across the room during, let's say, snack. Maybe snack is their activity where they're like really independent and they love to talk and are asking lots of questions and maybe only need a check-in here and there. That's going to be the time where you're able to see if I stand across the room, how do they do? And that doesn't mean that that's the time to now not be available, right? We're still going to be available to help if needed. But this is a check to see, okay, when can I eventually get to that point where I'm not available? And using positive reinforcement and capitalizing on natural contingencies, especially for areas that are historically challenging. There's emerging skills, new skills that they're practicing. We also don't need to only reinforce independence. We can reinforce the process, persevering, trying when things are really hard and staying calm. Something was really challenging, but they worked through it without any problematic behaviors or escalation. Praising the process and the effort involved has shown to result in children being more likely to tackle challenges. And natural consequences can also serve as reinforcers. I have a few examples here below, and they're just natural opportunities for things to result, for situations to ultimately lead to reinforcing interactions, which are, examples like, something's missing and the peer helps them find it, or they ask for help and the peer helps them and it ends up being this really much cooler project. And lastly, we'll transition to after that play date happens, what are we gonna do? I love this visual here. I think it's important for everybody to assume that your child is doing their best. We need to meet them where they're at, right? Review skills and what happened, being aware of those strengths and areas of needed support. So that way we can work on maybe the one skill outside of that play date more frequently, right? We can contrive and practice more frequently so that way next time it goes a little bit smoother. And planning for that future using the past. Right? We want to think about realistic expectations, but what are realistic expectations? Next, we're going to dive a little bit into a recent study that was done on what conversations typically look like for neurotypical adults. Hood and colleagues did a study last year in 2021, and they took a look at the qualitative nature of conversations. They took a look at about 40 conversations overall for 16 adults. These were adults that were in the ages of 19 to 35 years old. None of the participants had any scoring deficits in the socialization categories for standardized assessments. And there was one participant that did have a diagnosis, but otherwise it was ultimately a neurotypical population. And they looked at conversations in a variety of different contexts. They looked at conversations in a one-to-one format, just one other person present, in a group format being with 4 other people or 4 total people, and with friends versus with novel people. There was some very interesting findings from this study. There was some expected findings, but some things that I thought were very surprising. And I think this captures a little bit about what we should be thinking about when we're planning and like what our expectations should be overall. So here we have 4 different categories, some of their findings that they had found from looking at these conversations. They found that the participants were often speaking in that speaker role or talking about half the time when with one other person, and about 30% of the time when with a group, which makes sense, right? We talk less when we're in a group format, more people are speaking, talking, we're balancing that listener and speaker role. That's something that I was not surprised by. Most of the participants were directly facing their peers, whether it was while talking or while listening. However, there was a range on average between 78 and 100%. So again, not perfect, right? And gaze, so when they say gaze, they're talking about eye tracking. So looking and shifting their attention from one person to the other, speaking and listening. They found that about 65% of the time when people were talking, they were looking or tracking, whereas when they were listening, it was actually more frequent that they were tracking between people. This study suggests that continuous eye gaze may not be typical. And lastly, something I think everyone will be surprised at is that interrupting was very, very frequent. It happened about almost 27% of all speaking opportunities. There's a lot of speaking opportunities within 40 conversations. And they found similar results to a previous study that showed that, again, with neurotypical conversation, about 4 to 5 times someone was interrupting a minute. Conversation was generally continuous. Participants remained on topic and answered questions almost all of the time and elaborated very frequently. This graph here displays the average number of back and forth conversation exchanges on one topic. The green bar is referencing a one-to-one format where there are higher, what they term volleys back and forth, about 8.5 on a topic, and then in a group about half the time. And again, kind of goes hand in hand with the speaker amount of time speaking, right? It's less opportunities in a group. When there's more people, we're balancing that speaker and listener role. They also showed a little bit of findings about facial affect, and what that typically looked like was positive feedback being things like smiling or like nodding their head to indicate they agree. Was infrequent. It was about 25% of the time. Negative feedback, which was some examples included furrowing their eyebrows or making a disgusted face. This was non-existent. It never occurred. So even if they were possibly thinking something or didn't agree with something someone says, they didn't display it on their facial affect. This is another finding that I think everyone will find really surprising. I did myself. They looked at 2 different measures of distracting behavior. So they looked at gross motor and subtle motor. And gross motor were things like much larger motions, things like big arm stretches or moving their body in the chair. Subtle were things that were more discreet, things like tapping their foot or twirling their hair. Both types of distracting behavior had a very high degree of variability. There's a big range here. So, about 0 to 40% of the conversation, or 2 to almost 60% of the conversation. And a good proportion were well above. There was a handful of conversations where it was 100% of the time these behaviors were exhibited. Both types of distracting behavior were demonstrated by all participants, and that didn't necessarily take away from the back and forth nature of the conversations. Lastly here, just a few additional findings. Compliment giving was super rare, except with novel people, they were more likely to compliment give. Sharing private information was rare. So that is something that we typically see with the autism population, is knowing when to keep something personal or know when to keep something personal depending on what kind of relationship they have with that person. And another surprising finding was, out of 40 total conversations, there was only 8 times where someone had indicated an uninterest in the topic. Surprisingly, 7 of those 8 times, the speaker continued to talk They did not shift their topic. They continued to talk about that topic. There was only one time that they adjusted and changed topics abruptly. Overall, this study was one of few that took a look at the common qualitative characteristics of conversations. And again, for mostly neurotypical adults who had also reported that they were motivated socially. They were looking to establish friendships and build on their current friendships. This study included recommendations, and those recommendations were that we should be using peer normative data, and we should be using it to guide how we plan for goals, what or when that goal is considered mastered, and our overall expectations. Again, remember these findings were for adults that were socially motivated. They also emphasize that using this approach can deter from promoting unnatural repertoires that could potentially result in negative interactions.
So in total, we've shared a great deal regarding social play, promoting opportunities for children, and some of the relevant research and literature. Thank you for being present for this discussion. And as we wrap up, remember some of these key points, these final takeaways that you have. Be aware of and set realistic expectations for what both you and your child can accomplish at this specific moment in time. And remember, play is not perfect. It's not meant to be perfect. It's going to be silly. It's going to be odd, and it's not going to happen seamlessly. Keep practicing. Find these pockets of opportunities, expand on them. Repetition is necessary for growth. We have some references from several of the literature that Brielle spoke of and shared, but now we're going to kind of open it up. Questions from those who have been with us.
Thank you, Brielle and Erica. That was a great presentation. There was lots of helpful information in there. We have some time for questions. I was able to answer a couple of questions that came up in the Q&A. Are there any additional questions right now, either in the chat or the Q&A, that you would like me to answer? I'll just leave it. I'll just wait about another 30 seconds or so. Okay, I don't see anything in the Q&A or in the chat. The question that came up before that I was able to answer was about play and play dates in very young children, in toddlers. So I was able to answer about kind of what to look at it and what to expect in those situations. When they're very young, they're still not really playing with other children. It's more solitary play, and they're just really entering into parallel play at that age. So I think that the content of this presentation was really for children who are at the age where they can engage in cooperative play and interactive play. Probably would, Brielle and Erica, would you say around 5 would be the age that you're thinking, 4 or 5 here? Oh, I can't hear you, Brielle. I'm not sure why.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, typically around 4 to 5. But again, looking at those prerequisite skills, right? Sometimes we have a 3-year-old that has really strong foundational skills of those prerequisites that we listed, and that's where we would also expect those kinds of expectations where they're playing together.
Great. Good. I'm glad I was able to. I'm glad I got that right. And I think a couple of comments just came up. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Brielle.
That's okay. I was going to say, I think if we're talking about, really young, like you were mentioning, the goals there would be like the parallel play where you're just kind of like staying nearby in the area and engaging in play with their set while another peer is next to them, trying to build again that foundation, that groundwork to get to this stage.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great. I have a few comments I can read out, which is very nice to hear. people want to just thank you both. I have a parent saying that they're more motivated and positive to build their son's social skills and have some more information about that. Very good presentation, very clear with good information, client specific and norms from neurotypical population. Those are really great, nice comments. So thank you to those audience members who posted those. Oh, there is a question in the Q&A. I will pose this to you, to the speakers. What can be some examples of simple games to start with kids that don't have play skills or contact with other kids? Great question.
So the first thing I'm going to say is, what are they motivated by first? You know, if they have no interest in a set of blocks, but they love Play-Doh, go with the Play-Doh. And when we're looking at those starting things, one-step actions. You're not going to teach them Candyland. There's a lot of moving parts. Meet them where they are. If they're good with identifying colors and simple letters, some fine motor skills are strong, you know, doing some Play-Doh, some art, some character play. You're modeling a lot of those play interactions you're hoping to see, and you're engaging them in things they're already more likely to go towards, and you're starting them off to see, what will this look like when you're able to go with another peer and do this? And you're doing it in a way where they are more likely to have success, right? Start with a one-step activity. And if they do have that interest, they're able to sit at the table, do a bit of a board game. The things I think of are Connect Four, Jenga, Don't Break the Ice. You have one thing you really need to do and you're good, versus Candyland, Trouble, Guess Who? Much more complex.
Would you also say like simple matching games?
Yes.
Yeah.
Things where, or maybe modifying a game. So if it's more age appropriate to do a more advanced game, but perhaps the child doesn't have the skills required to play a complex game, maybe it can be modified in some way.
Absolutely. Just a common one, right? Musical chairs. So this is a common game for that kind of age range, right? And if losing is really challenging at first, we might just start by teaching the basic rules of, like, the music turns off, you sit in that chair, right? We don't have to take chairs away necessarily at first. That could be something we learn later, but just understanding the rules of, you know, music on means walk, music off means we find a chair to sit in. And that's just one, which is more of an open-ended game if you do play it that way. But simple matching games, like Jamie mentioned, are great. And then thinking about those turn-taking games that are very structured. You know, Candyland, I love Candyland because those rules have that matching component. So if they have the ability to look at the visual of the card and match to the board, right, that's something that really just involves finding that that connection on the board and moving their piece the amount of spaces. That's a good turn-taking game. Erica, do you have any other suggestions on additional? I love the Sneaky Squirrel game. I have to say it's my favorite game because it's really good at teaching some of those behavioral flexibility skills. Like, you know, sometimes you have to steal an acorn from someone. Sometimes the wind will blow their acorns back. But again, it's a game where you spin the wheel, you match and find the color or the number of acorns, 1 or 2.
And you can always modify that. If your child's not ready for this more complex, or they're not able to tolerate the squirrel stealing their acorns, cover it up, use only the colors. But another game that includes some matching is Zingo. Zingo is like a picture format of bingo. You're working on tolerating, it's not my turn, or only one of us have the hat, so we can't both get the token. You're promoting more opportunities to assess turn taking and tolerance, right? We talk about promoting opportunities. Here they are. They're embedded in all of these different games.
Great, thank you both. We have another question that came up. You mentioned age 4 or 5 for social interaction. Is this chronological or developmental age? I can answer that, if that's okay. It's developmental, right?
Yes, and also related to the scope of this presentation, not necessarily just, you know, to participate in social interaction in general. And again, I just want to emphasize that, you know, I talked a lot about these prerequisite skills. That doesn't mean that you can't practice any social skills at all, right? This just means that this is more for a less structured or less support environment. So you can be practicing a lot of those social skills, like, answering greetings or answering social questions and being able to, answer and make comments to each other in more structured environments, maybe with a higher level of support where there's a one-to-one or with an adult first or with a sibling. That doesn't mean that you just, don't have the opportunity to do it at all.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions that our audience members would like to post in the Q&A or in the chat? Give one last opportunity there before we close that out. Okay, all right, I'm going to close out the questions now. And as we wrap up today, I wanted to thank our speakers for sharing their expertise with us, and I want to thank the audience for attending. Brielle, could you advance the slide? Thank you. Excellent. Alpine Learning Group offers a full range of services, both educational and clinical services. We've listed a few of those services here, but this list is not exhaustive. To learn more about our work, visit our website at alpinelearninggroup.org. You can call the number at the bottom of the screen. And Brielle, if you can advance one more time, thank you. As a reminder, I want to let everyone know that this webinar is just one in a series of free webinars that we are conducting throughout the month of April. All of the webinars are recorded and will be available on the video library area of our website. So feel free to scan this QR code and learn more about the other webinars in this series. And thank you all for being here today. And we are going to end the webinar.